comics. You want to read them, but you're wondering to yourself, when you walk in a comic shop, there's rows and rows of these books. Issue 20, issue 12, issue 1. What does it all mean, and where do I start? There's so much history. How do I get into this? Hello, friends. This is a question that I get asked a lot. How do I get into comics? Where do I start? How do I begin? There's a lot of people that love superheroes, have loved them for a long time, like I did, and want to jump into comics but feel very overwhelmed. So I thought I would do a little video to just kind of talk about the different ways that you can read comics, how you can jump in, and how you can find those points that are good jump-on points naturally. I also want to do a follow-up video to this where I talk a little bit more in depth about specific comic book stories, events, and series that I really love, that I feel like are great jumping on points for people that want to get into comics today. So I wanted to say and invite you to comment down below and let me know if there are any specific types of comics you're looking to get into, if you have any specific questions in regards to that, in regards to a specific series or storyline or event that I'd recommend, and let me know in the comments. And if there are other people down there, if you see people asking those questions, also feel free. I know I have a range of people here in terms of how experienced folks are with reading comics. I feel like we have everything from people that have been collecting their whole lives to people that are just getting into it now, to people that really want to get into it and like don't really know how to do that, people that have been in and out. It's really a beautiful range in the community. So yeah, feel free to let me know those specific questions. I'm going to do a follow-up video where I'm going to talk about some of that, and I'll probably answer some of those questions either in the video or in the comments as well. I want to answer as many comments as I can. As you know, I love talking to you guys in the comments. And the other thing I would love is if there is a specific storyline or event or character or just something that you feel is a good jumping on point for those that are starting out. Feel free to drop that in the comments as well. But for this video, what we're going to be talking about is we're going to be mainly talking about the different types of ways to read comics, I guess. And when you go into a shop, kind of how to take a breath and hopefully not feel so anxious. And I say this because for me, walking into a comic shop the first time I walked into a comic shop, I don't think I bought anything. I'm pretty sure I left. So know that if that is you today and you are here, you are not alone. And that even myself, someone who now is very immersed in comics, had that anxiety moment walking into a comic shop and feeling overwhelmed. The fact that there are bins full of comics and some places you pull out the bins, it just made me feel like I was very standing out in this comic shop if I pulled out a bin, and then if I pulled it out and was like, oh, this isn't what I want, I don't know what I'm looking for. There are many places where we don't feel like we belong, but we do belong, and this is how we're going to find out. There are a few things you're going to see when you walk into a comic book shop. The first thing you'll probably see, or one of the first things I typically see in my shop, well, there's a lot of collectibles, so that's sick. But then there's also usually a big rack of comics, and those will be things that might look like this. Here. This is what we call a single issue. So a single issue, it's going to be in a bag and with a board usually, but some people will also put comics out on shelves unbagged and unboarded. Very vulnerable, these comics, to the elements. And some places you will take these up and then they will bag and board them for you with the cash if they're not already bagged and boarded. And some places they won't do that. Some places you'll have to pay extra. Some places won't even have bags and boards. Lots of different things. So a single issue is just one single issue of a story. And it can be something like this. This is actually a reprint of Wolverine issue number 1 from back in 1988, I think is the year that this comic started. So this one, we're just looking at the story of what's happening. And this is cool because it's a reprint. It also has all the ads from the old days. So it's just basically a refresh on this issue number 1. So that is a classic one. And if you see things like this, these are kind of cool if you want to find out, if you want to go back and maybe read, you know, this amazing, very long standing Wolverine series that we still keep coming back to today for legacy numbers. So that is one of the ways that you can pick up a comic. And this is one of the things you might see, but you also might see, it's obviously in issue number 1, this is an issue 110. 110 of Nightwing. Nightwing is an ongoing series that's happening right now, and so if you were to see this number might be intimidating to you. 110. Does that mean I have to have read 109 issues to know what's going on in this comic? Not necessarily. So the cool thing about modern comics is that we do tend to have kind of this splash page that'll give you like a breakdown. So this one doesn't have it, but usually it'll be where the title is, and then what they'll have is they'll have a little blurb here that'll say, like, you know, last time Spider-Man was fighting Doc Ock, and now he has to get a cure to save Aunt May or something, and then we're trying to find out what happens next. So it'll give you like a little update of what's been going on. So really, you should be able to jump into almost any issue. I'm a big fan of this method, even if it's issue 110. Comics are serial, and so there should always be stuff in here that are things that you can find familiarity in, so that you don't feel completely like a fish out of water. Now, will you understand everything in issue 110 of Nightwing if you've never read Nightwing? Definitely not. There's probably going to be things that you are like, oh, I wonder what's going on with this. But in general, you should be able to pick up what's going on with the issue. So I will say, if you see something where you just like the cover and you think it's fun, you can grab it. Or if it's a character you like. So maybe you are familiar with Nightwing from an animated series. Maybe you are a Titans fan, but you haven't ever read a comic. Well, at least you have familiarity with the character. So that's the other thing we can talk about as well. When it comes to comics, you're going to see this rack, and there's going to be a lot of different comics. There might be some DC comics, there might be some Marvel comics, and there might be something that is neither of those. So Marvel and DC are what we usually refer to as the big two in comics, the big two publishers of the comic book industry in North America. These are the heavy hitters. What does that mean? That means that with Marvel and DC, because a lot of the times we are familiar with those characters, with the heroes and with the villains from various other forms of media, whether that be animated series or movies or, I mean, who knows, maybe just a really cool ad that they appeared in. There are so many things that you're going to have that are going to be touchstones with these worlds and these characters. A lot of people know who Spider-Man is, but not everyone has read a Spider-Man comic. That being said, if you know Spider-Man, then it's going to be a little bit easier for you to just jump into a Spider-Man comic, because there are certain things about Peter Parker that are just kind of always there, or certain things about Miles Morales that are also just kind of always there. They're intrinsic to who the character is and to what their story is about. Same thing with Batman. That doesn't mean that things don't happen in the comics where things are shaken up, but just in general, I feel like that is a good thing to consider. Is there a character that you have familiarity with, that you have buy-in with? Those comics are probably going to be easier to get into. And then also looking out for that issue number. So if it's 110, then you know there's going to be more history there. It doesn't mean that you can't read it, but there might be some things that you're going to say, I don't know who this character is, or I don't really fully understand what's happening in this interaction. Whereas if you get something that's an issue 1, like this reprint of Wolverine, or if you even got, there's going to be a new Wolverine series soon coming out, because we're going back to ones. Those comics are great ones to start with, issue number 1s, because it's the starting of a story. And even if it's Wolverine and it's like Wolverine Volume 8, you could still grab that comic. Now, when I say Wolverine Volume 8, I don't mean a volume in terms of a trade. I'm going to talk about trade paperbacks in a minute. What I'm referring to is how many of those series have there been. So this is actually Wolverine Volume 2 in regards to that. What that means is this is the second Wolverine series that was published. Although this is the one people most know, there was a mini before this, and that one is actually counted as Volume 1, even though it was a mini. Sometimes minis are counted and sometimes they're not. It also depends on the titling. So if it was like Wolverine something something, then that would be a totally new volume count. So this is Wolverine Volume 2, because it came out in 1988 initially, and Volume 1 came out in 1982. Wolverine Volume 8 means that this is the 8th Wolverine series with that straight title, Wolverine, that was an ongoing series. And that one is starting in 2024. Now, of course, all these other volumes have happened before in terms of Wolverine the character, as well as a lot of X-Men history. There's a lot of stuff that Wolverine has been through. Also, he's a real old guy. But with Volume number 8, issue number 1, we're starting a new chapter, a new story with Wolverine. So that's why I would say that ones, or, you know, these lower numbers are good jumping on points, because there's been less story in this chapter that has happened yet. Whereas with Nightwing issue 110, a lot has happened in this chapter of Nightwing's story because we're far in. But I actually didn't even start with issue number 1 of Nightwing. I started in issue number 78 or something like that. I started when Tom Taylor came on. So you can also look, has there been a change in the creative team? Because that's also usually a time when we're getting a new story, getting a new flow, if you will. And I think also paying attention to creative teams is really important when it comes to getting into comics and kind of finding what you like and maybe why you like stuff. Try to pay attention to who your writers are, who your creators are, who your editors are. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit in terms of just things that you can use to find what you like, but just keep an eye on those credits that are in the comics. They're important. The other ways that you can get into comics is through trade paperbacks. These are great if there's a story that you're interested in or a series that you're interested in and you are like, I want to read that. But, maybe it's no longer out anymore in terms of single issues. Or maybe it is out in single issues, but you're like, I don't want to get an issue every month or bi-weekly or every week, or depending on what the release schedule of the comic is. That's more expensive. That's too many times to come to the comic shop. I'm not into it. Fair enough. Or maybe you don't have a local comic shop, so single issues aren't a viable option for you. Well, we have trade paperbacks. A lot of the times you can get these online, very accessible, but also your comic book shop will probably have a section where they have trades. We call these trade paperbacks because they are paper bound. They have a paperback. They just have this like kind of flimsy, kind of cardboardy paper. And these are collections of sometimes things like events, like we have with Secret Wars here. This is the original Secret Wars event. Or a series, so like we have with X Factor here. And the other thing to keep in mind is that with X Factor, because this was a whole series, and even sometimes with events, depending on how big they are, you might have something that you'll notice like this. So this says Volume 1 on this side. So the Volume 1 that's here on the side down at the bottom is not the volume in terms of like this run of X Factor, this series overall. But this is Volume 1 of this series, of this story. So what that means is if you are getting a trade that is a certain series, you want to make sure it's the right series, the right run. So then you're probably going to be looking for those creative names to find out, like, because you should try to look up who did that run, because these aren't going to have a year on them, which I feel like can be confusing for people. I know for me, when I first got into comics, that was the thing that was confusing, the way things are organized. Because there's volumes of series, and then there's volumes of trades. So this is X Factor Volume 3, which was published in 2006 to 2009. So this is Volume 1 of X Factor Volume 3 from 2006. But because this doesn't have like Volume 3 on the front or 2006, what you need to look out for is you need to look out for the art, you need to look out for that creative team so you can make sure you're grabbing the right X Factor series. Because there have been multiple X Factor runs, so that can be confusing. So there you go. There's a little life hack for how when you're looking at this, what you should be looking for. So that's one of the ways you can read. And these are kind of nice because it is like a whole collection. Also better for traveling, I find. Like if you want to travel with something, a trade paperback, it's light, it's a more complete story. You could also do something like a manga. So manga, you can get them, I think weekly usually manga come out, and usually it's a chapter of a story, or you can buy the little manga books, which come with a few of the chapters in one volume. So this is One Piece Volume Number 1, Romance Dawn. And this is collecting the first few chapters in the One Piece story, of which there are so many chapters. I'm trying to read some One Piece, and I feel like I'm going to be reading for a while, guys. But I'm really excited to jump into it. Manga is actually where I started with comics, and I'm sure there are going to be some people who are going to be like, you can't put manga on here. Manga's not a comic. But guess what? Manga is a comic. They're in the same world. These are two mediums that are very, very similar in terms of what they're doing. They're both serial. They're both telling a story with a bit over time. So with comics, we have issue numbers. With manga, we have chapter numbers. They have a release schedule that's typically regular, or as regular as it can be. With comics, it's typically monthly. With manga, I think it's typically weekly. But it also changes depending on the comic and the manga as to what that release schedule might be. And people do have hiatuses. With comics, you have a full team usually, including like a whole editorial team, someone doing colors, someone doing art, someone doing writing, someone doing letters. And with manga, it tends to be a much smaller team, if not just one person. The mangaka is the main person. That's the person that's writing and doing the art. And then if you get big enough and successful enough, you're in like shonen, you probably have a couple more people that are working with you, but for the most part, you are the person doing the story. So, yeah, manga is another way you could get into comics. It was the way that I started reading, basically, comics, and it has a similar format, except that you're going to read it backwards, if that makes sense. So, you start here, and then there's a specific way you read. But if you guys want more detailed stuff on how to just even break down a page, I could definitely do that. I don't know if we need that, but if you need it, I could do it for you. So the other way you can collect comics is with hardbacks. We call them hardbacks because the backs are hard. And that's why I have this beautiful Harleen. These are really pretty, so if you like just pretty things, I feel like hardbacks are a great way to collect series that you're like, oh, I want this on my shelf. It's gonna look so good. Not as good to travel with, but yeah. Look at this. Look at this beautiful dust jacket. I love a good dust jacket. So this is my copy of Harleen by Stefan Sajic, and it is gorgeous. And that's another way you can kind of grab stuff. But like I said, not as good for traveling, but these are a little bit nicer if you just want something that's more durable, if you want something that's going to be on your shelf. And you can also get events this way. You can get series this way. Like I have Harleen, which is a series from DC Black Label. Or the other thing you can do is you can go full out. You can go hardcore. And you can get an omnibus. This is my new House of M omnibus that I just ordered online, actually. This one I ordered online. Harleen and I think everything else here I bought in my shop. But this one was an online order. These are big. These have everything. So this is all of House of M, which is why it's big, it's heavy. Not great for taking around with you unless you have like one of those cool leather like bag books basically where you just have a strap, like a leather strap around your book. Even then, a little risky. There's also whole videos if you get an omnibus that will tell you about how to take care of your omnibus and like certain things to do and to avoid so you don't like crack your spine and damage it over time. So that's another thing to consider. And like I said, if you want a whole event, this is a good way to buy it just all in one package. But they are heavy. So if you get a lot of those, you're going to need a heavy-duty bookshelf to put them on. And that is also a very good way to get into, you know, if you want a whole collection of a series that maybe is longer, or if you just want like a big event with all the tie-ins and everything like House of M, then omnibuses are great for that. I think it's Omnibuy. And finally, the other way that you can get into comics is digitally through fun apps like Marvel Unlimited. Oh, look, I still have Comixology on here. Comixology. Rest in peace, dead. Rest in peace, Comixology. Put F's in the comments for Comixology. I also have Kindle because I also have books. I like to read books too, guys. Just FYI, I read novels and stuff. And I listen to them too. There's also DC Infinite, which is their app. It's not available in Canada though. I do have it, but it's not available in Canada. And then there's Marvel Unlimited, which is available in Canada and America and I think a lot of places. I don't know if it's available worldwide, but I know it's available in those two places, so it's better than we have with the other app. So the cool thing about the app is that with Marvel Unlimited, you just pay one set fee. I think I paid like 60 or 70 bucks for the year, and you get access to their library. It is not as up to date, so if you are reading something current, this might not be the best solution for you because it is usually about 3 months, sometimes a little bit further behind. It's supposed to be 3 months, but I feel like sometimes they are delayed depending on certain series and getting the scans in here. That is something to consider. But other than that, if you want to go back and read something older, oh, hey, look, they do have Blood Hunt. Issue number 1 from free. Oh, they have Free Comic Day Blood Hunt. Okay. Wait, that's cool. I guess it's free, so this one was put in maybe faster. That's cool. I didn't know that. I just learned something new. Also, I'm not sponsored by Marvel Unlimited, but Marvel Unlimited, if you wanted to sponsor me, I would happily take that because I do love this app. The other cool thing about this is that you can search certain characters, you can search certain series, you can also search a reading order. The searchability function is sometimes not the best, I will say, if you're looking up a specific series. I find it's like if it's got a lot of volumes, you might be scrolling for a bit. But if you are looking for an event, so if we look up like House of M, for example, which we just have here, I can search it, and then I can go to reading guides, and I can see House of M complete events. And it'll break down for you everything that's going on. I've been reading House of M right now because I'm doing a comic book club on my OF, so that is what we're reading. But yeah, you can go through and it'll give you all of the issues here, and then you can select those and read those and check them out. All in the right order. Very exciting. So I do love that part of it. And the other cool thing about reading comics digitally is they do have something which initially I believe was built by Comixology, but Marvel Incorporated, which is called Panel to Panel. So Panel to Panel is pretty fun because it kind of makes it feel like an action story. Like, it feels like you're not just reading a comic. It feels like you are like an animated story almost. The way that the story is told from panel to panel. And then you could also zoom out if you want. This is obviously Wanda's giving birth to the twins at the beginning of this story. So you could have it breaking down panel by panel. You can do a full page. You can zoom out depending on what you're reading on. This is a great way to read. Panel to panel is a great way to read on mobile, I find. But it can also be really fun to read even on like a big iPad. Also, shout out to Michael who got me this iPad a while ago. I read so much comics on here. It's so great when I'm traveling. And that's the other thing. I think digital is a really great way to consume comics when you're traveling because you can bring so many comics with you on an iPad, you know, digitally. You can have, I think on Marvel Unlimited, you can have up to 10 downloaded at a time. So like if you're going on a flight, you can download like 10 comics. You can read those throughout your flight. Anywhere that you have like Wi-Fi, you can go on and just read whatever. So that's the other way you can do it. So how do we find the comics that are right for us? Well, some things to consider. Writers and artists that you love. If you know there's a story that you've read, like, for example, I love Hellions, which was written by Zeb Wells. So when Zeb Wells started on Spider-Man, I was really excited, and I wanted to check out Spider-Man, because one, I love Spider-Man, and two, I love Zeb Wells. And I read Beyond. And Beyond was really fun. I actually really liked that story. And then we got to Dark Web, and I wasn't as big of a fan of that. But the idea is that if Zeb Wells is going to do something, I'm probably going to be more inclined to check it out just because I really love Hellions. And there's other things that I've read that I'm like, oh yeah, this is a Zeb Wells story too. Like USA Carnage, which is also a really fascinating story and I think is really, really cool. And it's also got some great art. But the other thing is I love like Peach Momoko, who's an artist. So anything that she does, I'll usually check it out. I even just buy covers sometimes for series I'm not even reading, just because it's got a cool Peach Momoko cover. And then I'll usually still read that issue to check it out. And sometimes you find a series you really like, and sometimes not so much. The other way that you can kind of get into stuff is with events that have things you like. So one of the events that I was checking out was King in Black. And King in Black is a really cool event that is basically about Null, this god of the symbiotes coming to Earth. And because I had some interest in Venom and what happened with Absolute Carnage, which was a previous event where Carnage was just going around basically destroying a bunch of symbiotes to try to awaken Null. This is like Null comes to Earth, and that's what King in Black is about. So I was interested in that story, and I decided I'm going to check it out. It's got symbiotes, it's got lots of cool stuff. And through that, I actually read a Spider-Woman tie-in, and I found that I really loved that series. So then I went back and I read that entire Spider-Woman comic, and I loved it. And it was by Carla Pacheco. So now I'm like, oh, that's another writer that I can add to my list of people that I enjoy. It's cool how, you know, you can kind of connect the dots there. So if there's an event that has something that you like in it, whether it's a villain or a type of threat, maybe it's aliens, maybe it's monsters, maybe like with Blood Hunt, which is going on right now, you really love vampires. That's a vampire-based event, so check that out. Blade is in it. But it is crazy. It's also by Jed MacKay, so if you like Jed MacKay, maybe you get in there. So if you're into, let's say, even like Pepe Larraz's art, you might be wanting to check out Blood Hunt, because that has Pepe Larraz on art. So you can kind of look at just the people that you're into, and through that way you can connect some of those dots. Or like, it could be something that's X-Men based. For example, you might be into a certain event because the X-Men are there. Like, they did the Ten of Swords event, which I really loved, which was also interesting because each issue wasn't necessarily a tie-in. It was more like the story unfolded through multiple series that were part of the X-Men universe. There might be a Fantastic Four event that you want to check out. So you might be into something like Reckoning War, which was a recent Fantastic Four event that they had back in Dan Slott's run. So, you know, there's lots of things to consider. What are characters you like? What are teams you like? What are threats that you like? What creatives do you like? Even editors, I would say. So there are certain editors I prefer and certain editors that don't tend to like what they work on as much. So you can keep in mind who's editing a book, because I think that's also going to really shape how the book unfolds. Something else you might want to keep in mind is the big two versus the indie comics. So we talked a little bit about the big two and that buy-in, but what about these other books on the shelf that you're like, I don't know, what's this dark ride thing that's happening over here? What's this radiant black that I keep seeing? Tell me about this radiant black. Well, these are going to be indie comics, and a lot of people don't actually consider things like Radiant Black to be indie because they're with Image, or Dark Ride with Image, but with Image it's still indie because the creators actually own the comic still. They have the rights to the characters, and they just work with Image as a publisher to get their story out. So I believe they still have to pitch and stuff like that, but they're actually helping to bankroll as well that comic series. They are investing in themselves, putting the comic out there, and then they have a profit share with Image, who publishes it for them. There are also tons of other smaller publishers out there. There's not just Image. There's Dark Horse, there's IDW, there's Valiant. There's so many different publishers. I can't even say all of the publishers in this video. There's Dynamite. Some of them even have bigger IPs like Ninja Turtles, Star Trek. They might have, Vampirella is a pretty big character, or Red Sonja. Conan the Barbarian. We got lots of different bigger projects, Power Rangers, but at the end of the day, they are smaller publishers. And the cool thing about supporting sometimes smaller publishers, especially like Image, is that you can kind of think about how people are making money. So when you buy a comic, how much of that is actually going to the creator? Versus with DC and Marvel, it's kind of relying on a contract that they have with that publisher as to how much they're going to get paid based on what they negotiate. So usually probably based on how big of a name they are in the industry, and how, if they're someone that's newer, they're not going to be paid as much as someone like Brian Michael Bendis if they do a series, right? So that's also something to consider if you want to consider like how your money is getting to the artists and the writers and everyone that brings these stories to us. But at the end of the day, I don't know. Not everybody cares as much about that, but I find it fascinating. So I just thought I'd share that little bit of insight for you if you want to consider it. This is part of the reason why I took a year off of the big two for my collecting, for my physical collecting, just because I wanted to support indie stories. And a lot of the times, a lot of them also are not attached to IPs. And so it's kind of cool to just read a story that's just a cool story. It's not like Spider-Man, it's not Star Wars. It's just a really cool story about a horror-themed amusement park that's basically like Disney, but what if it was all horror and there was maybe a demon that the creator of the park made a pact with? So that's it, friends. This has been a very long video, but I hope you found it very in-depth in terms of you finding the comics that you want and that you need in life. It isn't easy to get into comics, and if you are feeling overwhelmed, you are not alone, but at the same time, you just need to push through, because I believe for everybody out there, there is a comic on the shelf that needs to be in their life and that, you can connect with and you can find, and it will just make your day brighter. It'll help you to feel seen in the world and connect with some really cool art. Comics is a really cool medium, whether that be you're reading American comics or whether you're reading manga, doesn't matter. Reading is cool. It's powerful. It's imagination. So get out there and get to those shops if you can, or go online, go on sites that sell comics and see if you can find something that you connect with. I hope this helped. If you have any other questions, please do put them down in the comments below. I really do want to engage and interact with you and help you find the perfect comic. And I cannot wait to do my follow-up video where we'll talk a little bit more about specific stories that I've loved that I would recommend as good entry points. That's everything from me today, friends. I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, stay nerdy.